The cold night wind cut like blades, making the few people still walking the streets huddle inside their coats. For most, it was just another ordinary night. But for Lucas, a 12-year-old homeless boy, it was yet another battle against hunger and exhaustion. His bare feet were dirty and wounded from the freezing asphalt. His stomach growled in pain, as if begging for mercy. He no longer remembered the last time he had a decent meal. During the day, he had tried to get a few coins by asking for help on street corners, but most people simply looked away, ignoring his existence. That night, after rummaging through trash cans and finding nothing but empty wrappers, Lucas smelled something that made his heart race: real food. He followed the irresistible aroma of grilled meat and warm bread until he arrived in front of a fancy restaurant. Through the large glass window, he saw a brightly lit dining hall filled with customers laughing and savoring abundant meals. The atmosphere was luxurious. Sparkling chandeliers hung from the ceiling, the tablecloths were pristine white, and the waiters, dressed elegantly, moved gracefully between tables, serving guests with utmost courtesy. Lucas stood there on the sidewalk, his eyes fixed on the food. He felt ashamed to enter. He knew that his dirty, unkempt appearance did not belong in a place like that, but hunger was stronger than any pride. He took a deep breath, gathered his courage, and pushed open the glass door. As soon as he took his first step inside, he felt the shock of the restaurant's welcoming warmth against his frozen skin. But within seconds, he also felt something even more intense, the sharp gazes cutting through him like knives. A couple sitting near the entrance stopped their conversation and eyed him from head to toe, frowning. A woman in an expensive dress murmured something to the man beside her, who simply shook his head in disapproval. A group of young people chuckled discreetly, pointing at the boy's tattered clothes. Lucas tried to ignore them, focusing on the counter where a waiter was finishing taking an order. He walked forward, hoping to be heard. "Excuse me, sir, do you have any leftover food?" he asked softly, his voice trembling with hunger and shame. The waiter lifted his eyes and grimaced. Without responding, he glanced at the manager, who was already approaching with firm steps. The manager was a tall man, dressed in a well-pressed suit, his gaze stern. He crossed his arms and sighed impatiently before speaking. "What are you doing here, kid?" Lucas swallowed hard and tried to explain. "I just wanted a little food. Anything, even leftovers. I'll pay when I can." The manager let out a mocking laugh. "Pay? With what? You don't even have a place to sleep." Nearby, customers chuckled under their breath. Lucas felt his face burn with shame, but he tried to persist. "Please, sir, I'm really hungry. I don't need much, just a piece of bread and anything." The manager rolled his eyes, impatient. "Listen, kid, this isn't a charity house. If you want free food, go to a shelter. Now get out before I call security." Lucas's heart tightened. His face turned red, not just from the cold, but from humiliation. He looked around, hoping someone would step in, that someone would take pity on him, but no one did. Some averted their gaze, while others simply watched as if it were just another form of entertainment. One of the customers, a man in an expensive suit with a gleaming watch on his wrist, made a loud remark for everyone to hear. "People like him shouldn't even be near places like this. He's ruining the customer's appetite." Lucas felt his eyes fill with tears, but he refused to cry. He didn't want to give them another reason to laugh at him. He simply lowered his head and took a step back, ready to leave. But before he could reach the door, something unexpected happened. The glass door opened again, and someone very special walked into the restaurant. The murmurs stopped. The customers turned their heads, curious. The manager, who still had a look of disdain toward Lucas, suddenly widened his eyes and straightened his posture with newfound respect. Lucas felt the presence of someone beside him, but it took him a few seconds to lift his head and see who it was, and in that moment everything changed. "Aqui está a tradução para o inglês," Silence took over the restaurant the moment the glass door opened again. All the gazes that had been fixed on the homeless boy now turned to the new figure who had just walked in. It was as if the entire place had frozen for a moment. The manager, who just seconds ago had an impatient and superior look, widened his eyes in surprise. The customers, who had been discreetly laughing at Lucas's humiliation, were now whispering among themselves, some discreetly pulling out their phones to record. Lucas, still looking down, didn't understand what was happening until he heard a strong yet calm voice echo through the restaurant. "What's going on here?" He slowly lifted his head and, to his surprise, saw Neymar standing right beside him. The soccer star was dressed casually, wearing a black cap and a branded hoodie, but even without his game attire, he was instantly recognizable. His face was familiar to anyone who followed football, and his commanding presence radiated a different energy throughout the restaurant. The silence turned into a rising murmur. "Is that Neymar?" a woman whispered to her husband. "No way! What's he doing here?" said a young man at the nearby table. The manager quickly changed his irritated expression to a more professional demeanor, forcing a polite smile. "Mr. Neymar, what an honor to have you here," he said, slightly bowing his head. But Neymar didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the boy beside him, who still seemed unsure of what was happening. "Kid, are you okay?" the player asked, crouching slightly to look Lucas in the eyes. Lucas hesitated, unsure if he should respond. His heart was racing. Why was Neymar talking to him? I just wanted a little food, sir," the boy replied, his voice weak. Neymar furrowed his brows and looked around. The atmosphere in the restaurant was tense. He could feel the discomfort in the air, sense the judgmental looks directed at Lucas. Then he turned to the manager and asked directly, "And why can't he eat here?" The manager visibly tensed. His hands began to sweat. He glanced around as if searching for a better answer than the obvious one. "Well, Mr. Neymar, our restaurant has a policy of maintaining a pleasant environment for all our customers. And a hungry kid doesn't fit into that policy," Neymar interrupted, crossing his arms. His expression was serious. The manager cleared his throat, trying to mask his nervousness. "It's not that, sir. We just try to maintain a certain standard for our patrons. This boy, well, he what?" Neymar tilted his head, waiting for an answer. The manager fell silent. He knew that anything he said would only make things worse. The entire restaurant was watching. Some people already had their phones pointed at the scene. Then Neymar took a deep breath and said something that made the entire restaurant hold its breath. "Then I'll eat with him." A deep silence filled the room. The manager blinked a few times, unable to believe what he had just heard. "You mean eat with him?" he asked, stammering. "That's exactly what I said. Get us a table, now." The manager looked around, realizing that all eyes were on him. If he refused, he knew the situation could go viral within minutes. He sighed, forcing a fake smile. "Of course, Mr. Neymar. Right this way, please." As they walked toward a table, Lucas was still in shock. He didn't understand why Neymar was doing this. No one had ever cared about him before. They sat at a large table in the center of the restaurant, and the soccer star made sure Lucas sat beside him, as if he were a special guest. "What do you want to eat, kid?" Neymar asked, sliding the menu over to him. Lucas looked at the list of dishes with wide eyes. He had never in his life held such an elegant menu. He didn't know what to say. All the meals seemed too expensive and sophisticated for him. "Anything is fine," the boy said shyly. Neymar smiled and closed the menu. "Then bring him the best dish in the house, and one for me too." The waiter, who had previously ignored Lucas, was now eager to serve. "Right away, sir," he said, rushing off. As they waited for the food, Lucas looked at Neymar, still in disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Neymar shrugged and smiled. Because I've been in your place, kid. I know what it's like. Lucas blinked, surprised. You? But you're famous, you have money. Neymar nodded. I do now, but when I was a kid, my family and I went through some really tough times. I know what it's like to be hungry and have no one to help, and if today I can do something for someone, I do it. Lucas felt his eyes well up with tears, but he blinked quickly to hold them back. For the first time in a long while, someone was looking at him as a human being. Meanwhile, the entire restaurant was watching the scene unfold. Some people who had previously judged the boy now looked visibly ashamed. The wealthy man who had earlier insulted Lucas now stared awkwardly at his plate, as if wishing he had never opened his mouth. The phones kept recording. The story that was unfolding here would soon spread to the world. But for Lucas, none of that mattered. Nothing else existed except this moment. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. And that night was about to change his life forever. Here's the English translation. The delicious smell of freshly prepared food soon filled the table as the waiter brought 2 steaming plates, placing them in front of Neymar and Lucas. The boy stared at the dish with wide eyes. It was a refined meal. A juicy steak, well-seasoned rice, and side dishes he had never tasted before. Lucas hesitated. It had been a long time since he had eaten a proper meal. His hunger was intense, but at the same time, he felt like he didn't belong in that place. The weight of the stairs around him still made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be a bother to Neymar or make him feel embarrassed. Go ahead and eat, kid. This is for you, Neymar said with an encouraging smile. The boy looked at him, then at the food, and couldn't resist any longer. He picked up the silverware and started eating slowly, savoring each bite. The taste was incredible. With every mouthful, his empty stomach seemed to thank him. Neymar also started eating, but in reality he was more interested in observing Lucas. He saw a reflection of his own childhood in the boy. He remembered the times his family struggled to put food on the table, the difficult days before fame. Has it been a long time since you've had a meal like this? The player asked, trying to start a conversation. Lucas nodded while chewing. After swallowing, he replied in a low voice, "A very long time." Silence took over for a few seconds until Neymar continued, "Where do you live, kid?" The question made Lucas lower his eyes. He played with his fork on the plate, hesitant. "I don't have a home. I stay on the streets. Sometimes I sleep in a shelter when there's space, but most nights I stay near the bus station. At least there's a roof over my head." Neymar felt a tightness in his chest upon hearing that. It was hard to imagine such a young boy living in such harsh conditions. He remained silent for a moment, thinking. "And your parents?" he asked cautiously. Lucas sighed, as if that question carried more weight than any other. "My dad disappeared when I was little. I don't even remember him. My mom, she tried to take care of me, but she got involved with drugs and ended up in prison. After that, I was placed in a shelter, but I ran away. I'd rather live alone than be in a place where no one cares about me." The boy's words hit Neymar like a punch. Lucas's reality was too cruel for someone so young. He looked at the boy and saw more than just a homeless kid. He saw someone who still had hope, even if it was buried beneath layers of suffering. "Are you still in school?" Neymar asked. Lucas let out a sad chuckle. "I dropped out a long time ago. How could I study if I didn't even have a place to sleep?" The entire restaurant continued to watch the conversation. Many customers who had previously judged the boy now looked ashamed. Some even seemed emotional. "You know, Lucas, life has a strange way of testing us, but it also has a way of changing when we least expect it," Neymar said thoughtfully. Lucas frowned, not fully understanding. "What do you mean?" Neymar smiled and patted the boy's shoulder lightly. Have you ever thought about having a second chance? About starting over? Lucas's heart raced. He didn't know if he should get his hopes up, but it was impossible not to feel different hearing those words. I don't know, he answered hesitantly. Neymar looked him straight in the eyes and said something that would change his life forever. What if I gave you that chance? Lucas's eyes widened. What do you mean? I can help you, but you have to want it. I can find you a place to live, make sure you go back to school and have a decent life. But there's one condition. The boy swallowed hard. What condition? You have to promise to give it your best, that you won't give up, that you'll fight for a different life. If you do that, I'll be by your side. Lucas didn't know what to say. His mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. It felt like a dream. He looked at Neymar, trying to figure out if this was real. Why would you do this for me? He asked, his voice trembling. Neymar smiled. Because someone once did it for me, and because I believe everyone deserves a chance. Tears began to well up in Lucas's eyes. For the first time in years, he felt like he mattered to someone, that his life could have a future. The entire restaurant watched in silence, some customers discreetly wiping their eyes. The manager, who had once treated Lucas with disdain, now looked ashamed and regretful. Lucas took a deep breath and looked at Neymar with a determination he had never felt before. I promise. Neymar smiled and extended his hand. Lucas shook it firmly. At that moment, his life changed forever. Here's the English translation. Lucas squeezed Neymar's hand tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, everything would disappear. The entire restaurant was silent, with customers watching the scene with emotion. The manager, who had previously looked down on the boy, now kept his head lowered, visibly ashamed. Neymar looked at Lucas with an encouraging smile. Let's get out of here. We have a lot to talk about. The player called the waiter and asked for the bill. Before paying, he made sure to leave a generous tip for the staff member who had treated him with respect. As for the manager, now unsure where to hide his embarrassment, he tried to redeem himself. Mr. Neymar, I'm sorry. I didn't know this boy was special. Neymar frowned. Everyone is special. You shouldn't treat anyone like that, no matter who they are. The manager swallowed hard, unable to respond. Lucas and Neymar left the restaurant, and for the first time, the boy felt the night breeze differently. It wasn't just a cold wind, like so many nights he had spent sleeping on the streets. It was the wind of a new beginning. Where are we going? Lucas asked, still struggling to believe what was happening. First, we're taking you somewhere safe. You need to rest, take a proper shower, and eat well. Neymar made a phone call, and within minutes a sleek black car pulled up in front of them. A driver stepped out and opened the door. Lucas hesitated. He had never ridden in such a luxurious car. He looked at Neymar, who smiled. Come on, get in. Today is the start of a new life for you. The boy took a deep breath and stepped inside. The seat was so soft it felt like it was hugging him. He looked around, mesmerized. This feels like something out of a movie, he murmured. Neymar chuckled. And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The car drove through the city until it reached a luxury hotel. Lucas was speechless as he took in the massive, brightly lit building. When he stepped inside, he smelled expensive perfume in the air and felt the plush carpet sink slightly beneath his feet. The receptionist looked at Neymar and smiled. Good evening, sir. We've prepared the room as requested. Lucas turned to Neymar, confused. You had already booked a room. The player smiled. I told you I believed in you. I knew you would accept my help. Lucas felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, someone believed in him. They took the elevator up to the designated floor. When the door opened, Lucas's jaw dropped. The room was enormous, with a huge bed, a giant television, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a palace. "All of this is for me?" he asked, still in disbelief. "Yes, but just for now. This is the first step. Later, we'll find you a permanent place to live." Lucas felt his eyes well up with tears. He walked into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and let the water run over his fingers. "Hot water," he whispered. It had been so long since he'd had a hot shower that he had almost forgotten what it felt like. "Go ahead, take a shower. We'll talk more afterward." Lucas nodded and closed the bathroom door. Neymar stood there, thoughtful. He knew that helping Lucas wasn't just about providing a roof and food. The boy would need emotional support, education, and most importantly, someone who truly cared about him. After a long shower, Lucas emerged wearing a fluffy white robe. His hair was clean, and he looked like a completely different person. "I don't even recognize myself in the mirror," he said, chuckling shyly. Neymar pointed to the bed. "Sit down. I want to talk to you." Lucas obeyed. "Now that you have a place to stay, we need to think about your future. I want you to go back to school. I want you to have a path to follow. Do you like anything? Do you have any dreams?" Lucas thought for a moment. "I've always liked soccer, but I never got to play on a real team." Neymar smiled. "Then let's change that. Tomorrow, I'll take you to a sports center where kids and teenagers train. I want you to try it out, and if you like it, we'll find a way to get you on a team." Lucas's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. But it's up to you. Are you willing to work hard?" Lucas nodded firmly. "I'll give it my best. I promise." That night, Lucas slept in a real bed for the first time in years. The feeling of safety and comfort was something he had never experienced before. In the following days, Neymar took Lucas to the sports center. For the first time, the boy trained on a real field, wearing cleats and a uniform. Even though he lacked experience, his determination and drive caught the coach's attention. Over time, Neymar helped Lucas join a youth team. He also made sure the boy returned to school, hiring private tutors to help him catch up. The transformation was incredible. The homeless boy who was once humiliated and ignored now had a new life, new dreams, and most importantly, someone who believed in him. Months later, Lucas was on the field, wearing his team's jersey. Neymar watched from the stands, proud. When the game ended, Lucas ran up to him and hugged him. "Thank you, Neymar. If it weren't for you, I'd still be on the streets. You changed my life." Neymar smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "You changed your life. I just gave you the chance. The credit is all yours." At that moment, Lucas realized that his story wasn't about sadness and suffering, but about resilience and hope. He was no longer just a street kid. He was a boy with a future, and it all started with a simple act of kindness.